This is Iryna Zarutska, and she has just realized she's been stabbed in the neck by a man she had never even met. By now, chances are you've already seen this video. It spread rapidly across social media, sparking outrage and making headlines around the world. But what most people don't know is why the suspect chose her. And why, unbelievably, there's even a GoFundMe page set up for him instead of Iryna. Let's break it down.
Today, I would like to address the tragedy that has not received nearly enough media attention, the brutal murder of Iryna Zarutska. Here are the facts that many outlets have shamefully and intentionally failed to report until President Trump drew attention to it.
Out of respect for Iryna and her family, we won't be showing any graphic details here. Our deepest condolences go out to her loved ones as we talk about her story today. Iryna was born and raised in Kiev, where her childhood dreams were shattered by the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. She and her family were forced to leave behind everything familiar, their home, their friends, their country, just to survive. They eventually arrived in the United States, settling in Charlotte, North Carolina, with the hope that this city would finally give them the peace and security they had lost. For Iryna, the move to America was more than survival. It was an opportunity to start fresh. Friends and family described her as vibrant, creative, and endlessly kind, someone who poured her energy into art and into making others feel welcome. By the summer of 2025, Iryna had been in Charlotte for 3 years, slowly building a life for herself. She still missed Ukraine deeply, but she carried her culture and her roots proudly while embracing her new community. The night of August 22nd began like any other for Iryna Zarutska. Fresh off her shift at a local pizzeria, still dressed in her uniform, she boarded the Blue Line train at East-West Boulevard Station around 9:40 p.m. Surveillance footage captured her routine movements, AirPods in, phone in hand, as she slipped into the first available seat. She looked tired, like any young woman at the end of a long day, but calm and at ease. To her, nothing about that evening suggested danger. Just behind her sat a man in a red hoodie. Iryna had never met him, never spoken to him, and had no reason to notice him. Yet witnesses later recalled he seemed unsettled, fidgeting, and muttering under his breath long before she boarded, signs of an unease that no one could have imagined would turn deadly. While other passengers were lost in their own silence, he was locked in a darker battle, already making a decision that would shatter lives within minutes. The attack happened without warning. The man reached into his pocket, pulled out a folding knife, and paused, just for a heartbeat, as though caught between hesitation and resolve. Then, with sudden, terrifying force, he lunged forward and drove the blade into Iryna's throat. It was so quick, so unexpected, that those around her barely had time to process what had happened. Even Iryna herself, shocked and confused, didn't immediately realize she was bleeding. In those brief seconds of disbelief, fear overtook her. Her ordinary commute had turned into a nightmare she could never have imagined. Some passengers froze in horror, their minds struggling to catch up to the reality unfolding before them. Others screamed or scrambled toward the doors, desperate to escape. But the attacker didn't stop. With cold precision, he stabbed Iryna 3 more times in rapid succession. The violence was methodical, almost mechanical, and then, just as suddenly as it began, he stepped back. What made the moment even more chilling was what came next. He didn't run. He didn't panic. Instead, he simply walked away, calm and unhurried, as though nothing had happened at all. Surveillance footage captured the eerie aftermath. Blood dripped from his own hand, injured during the stabbing, yet his demeanor remained disturbingly casual. At the next stop, he removed his hoodie, pressing it against his wound as though it were nothing more than a minor scratch, not the aftermath of a brutal attack. To investigators, this lack of fear or urgency wasn't just unusual, it was deeply unsettling, a glimpse into the detached mindset of someone who seemed entirely disconnected from reality. Meanwhile, chaos consumed the train car. trembling passengers finally snapped into action. Some rushed to Iryna's side, desperately trying to stop the bleeding. One pressed against her wound, while others shouted for help and fumbled to call 911 with shaking hands. A few bolted from the train in terror, running down the platform to find police. What should have been another uneventful evening commute had descended into panic and heartbreak. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air as emergency crews raced to the scene. By the time paramedics reached Iryna, the damage was already irreversible. Her wounds were catastrophic, leaving her with no chance of survival. Despite every effort, she was pronounced dead shortly after 10 p.m. Her life stolen in the span of mere minutes, in the very city where she thought she was safe. The aftermath left passengers traumatized, with at least one taken to the hospital after suffering a severe panic attack from the shock. Investigators quickly locked down the scene, photographing every trace of evidence and swabbing for DNA to ensure no detail was missed. But beyond the tape and the paperwork, one truth stood above all. A young woman who had fled the horrors of war had been brutally murdered in the very place she thought she was safe, and it was all captured on camera for the world to see. The man arrested that night was quickly identified as 34-year-old DeCarlos Brown Jr., and as investigators began piecing together his past, a troubling picture emerged. Brown was not some unknown drifter who had slipped quietly through society's cracks. He had a long and documented history with law enforcement in North Carolina. His criminal record stretched back more than a decade, filled with arrests for robbery, breaking and entering, and felony larceny. Court documents revealed that he had spent roughly 6 years in prison for those crimes before finally being released in September of 2020. But release from prison did not mark a fresh start for Brown. Instead, his life unraveled further, marked by instability, homelessness, and escalating brushes with the law. In September of 2022, he was arrested once again for the 14th time, this time for attacking a woman, though details of that incident remain limited. By January of 2025, just 8 months before Iryna's murder, Brown was back in police custody for a bizarre offense that offered a disturbing window into his mental state: misuse of the 911 emergency system. According to reports from that incident, Brown had called emergency services claiming that he had been poisoned with some kind of man-made material that was now lodged inside his body. He insisted to officers that this mysterious substance was controlling when he ate, walked, and even spoke, as though he were a puppet under the command of some unseen force. To the responding officers, it was immediately clear that this was not a simple prank call, but a delusional outburst. Court records later confirmed that Brown had long been diagnosed with schizophrenia, a severe mental illness that can distort reality and produce hallucinations, paranoia, or disorganized thinking. In fact, Brown's family members, including his own mother, had spent years trying to get him help. They watched him struggle, slip in and out of stable housing, and spiral deeper into unpredictable behavior. But the mental health system, already overwhelmed and under-resourced, failed to intervene in time. In an interview, his mother admitted that, although she was aware of his past troubles, she never imagined her son would be capable of something like this.
Even at that point, did you ever think it's possible that he might actually hurt somebody else?
He's been saying it so long. You know, I want the police. The police is telling me what to eat. The police telling me how to act. But never hurt somebody? No.
By July of 2025, just a month before Iryna's killing, a public defender had raised serious questions in court about whether Brown was even competent to stand trial for his earlier 9/11 misuse arrest. A judge agreed that his mental health was in doubt and ordered a psychiatric evaluation. Yet tragically, that evaluation never took place. Delays in scheduling meant Brown was still waiting for treatment by the time August 22nd arrived. That meant a man with a history of violence, diagnosed schizophrenia, and clear signs of delusional thinking was left unsupervised, untreated, and effectively free to roam the streets. It is this detail that later fueled widespread outrage. The system had recognized that Brown needed help, but bureaucracy and backlogs left him untreated long enough for tragedy to strike. Looking back, it seemed inevitable that someone vulnerable would pay the price. Investigators reviewing the CCTV footage from the train were horrified by how calculated yet detached the murder seemed. Iryna and Brown had no prior connection, no conversation, no interaction online, no personal history of any kind. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Detectives concluded that the attack was entirely random, fueled by Brown's inner turmoil, though the exact motive remained elusive. Was it an episode of psychosis, a violent impulse triggered by delusions, or was it something darker, like deep-seated rage that had finally boiled over? As investigators dug deeper, they found no evidence that drugs or alcohol played a role in the attack. Some speculated it might have been racially motivated, but police uncovered nothing to support that theory. What eventually came to light was far more disturbing. According to his family, DeCarlos Brown Jr., who had long struggled with paranoid schizophrenia, was gripped by delusions that night. He believed Iryna was reading his mind and even claimed there were strange materials or chips implanted in his body that were forcing him to act. These beliefs, shaped by years of untreated mental illness, fueled his paranoia until it erupted into violence. Within hours of his arrest, Brown was treated at Atrium Health Hospital for the injury to his hand sustained during the stabbing. Police guarded his room, ensuring he could not escape, though his behavior remained eerily calm throughout the process. After doctors cleared him for release, officers transported him directly to Mecklenburg County Jail, where he was formally booked on a charge of first-degree murder. The charge carried the highest stakes possible: a potential death sentence or life without parole if convicted. Court proceedings began quickly, with a judge ordering that Brown be held without bond. This meant there was no possibility of him walking free while awaiting trial, a decision that brought some comfort to Iryna's grieving family. But even at this early stage, one critical issue loomed over the case: Brown's competency to stand trial. Just as his defender had argued in July, the question of whether Brown truly understood the charges against him or could participate in his defense would have to be answered before the legal process could move forward. To determine competency, the court ordered another psychiatric evaluation. This assessment would involve a forensic psychiatrist analyzing Brown's mental state to decide if he was fit for trial. If he was found incompetent, he could be sent to a state hospital until doctors deemed him stable enough to participate, a process that might delay the trial for months or even years. But if he was ruled competent, the case would proceed toward a high-stakes trial in which prosecutors could seek the ultimate penalty. For prosecutors, the evidence was already overwhelming. The surveillance footage captured the entire attack in clear detail, leaving little room for doubt. Witness testimony further corroborated what the cameras had recorded, and forensic teams had recovered the blood-stained knife, as well as Brown's fingerprints and DNA. The prosecution's case was ironclad, and the only real uncertainty lay in how Brown's defense team would navigate his history of schizophrenia. Would they pursue an insanity defense, arguing that his illness left him incapable of knowing right from wrong? Or would they negotiate a plea deal to avoid the death penalty in exchange for life in a psychiatric facility? Outside the courtroom, the community's anger continued to mount. The revelation of Brown's criminal history left many questioning how someone with so many red flags had been allowed to live unsupervised among the public. Iryna's friends and supporters demanded accountability, not just for Brown, but for the systems that had failed to intervene before he killed an innocent woman. On social media, comments poured in from across the world, many pointing to the bitter irony that Iryna had escaped the horrors of war in Ukraine only to be slaughtered in a place that promised safety. Adding insult to injury, Just days after Iryna's death, the Charlotte City Council held a meeting to discuss transit safety in response to the killing. But instead of setting a somber tone, council members paused the session to celebrate a birthday with cake, even posting about it online. The image of city leaders eating cake before resuming discussion about a brutal murder enraged the public, who saw it as tone-deaf and disrespectful. For Iryna's supporters, it was yet another sign that officials were disconnected from the true weight of what had happened. As the investigation transitioned into the courtroom, the case against Brown moved forward at an unusual speed, propelled by the overwhelming evidence captured on camera. On August 29th, just 1 week after the attack, a grand jury indicted him on a charge of first-degree murder. Prosecutors made it clear that this was not a case that would be resolved quietly, as the brutality demanded the full weight of the law. In North Carolina, first-degree murder is a capital felony, and although the district attorney had not yet announced whether they would pursue the death penalty, the possibility hung over every proceeding. From the beginning, the focus inside the courtroom was not whether Brown had committed the murder. There was no denying that. Instead, the central question was whether he would be deemed competent to stand trial. Competency does not erase guilt, but determines whether a defendant understands the charges against them and can assist in their own defense. For Brown, whose history of schizophrenia and delusions was already documented, this evaluation would decide whether he went to trial immediately or was diverted into months of psychiatric treatment. Psychiatrists tasked with his evaluation combed through his past, examining his medical records, prior arrests, and the disturbing 911 call he made earlier that year. They noted his claims about man-made material inside his body controlling his movements, his pattern of erratic behavior, and his frequent isolation from reality. The evaluation also included direct observation, with doctors assessing whether Brown could follow conversations, comprehend legal terms, and answer questions logically. It was a painstaking process, one that highlighted how the intersection of mental illness and violent crime often stalls justice in complicated and frustrating ways. For Iryna's family, waiting for answers was its own kind of torment. They had survived the heartbreak of leaving their homeland under fire, only to bury their daughter in a city where she had dreamed of safety. Friends organized vigils in Charlotte, holding candles and placing flowers at the East-West Boulevard station, where Iryna had spent her final moments. Photos of her smiling face, often with paintbrushes or artwork in the background, circulated widely as people tried to remember her for who she was rather than the way she died. Donations through GoFundMe began pouring in, many accompanied by heartfelt messages from strangers who had never met Iryna but felt connected to her story. Some donors were Ukrainians in the diaspora, moved by the thought that one of their own had escaped the violence of war only to face another kind of brutality abroad. Others were Americans horrified by the randomness of the crime, questioning how a man with such a long criminal history and documented mental illness had been free to walk the streets. Each message added to the chorus of grief and anger, building pressure on officials to answer hard questions about failures in both public safety and mental health care. Meanwhile, discussions about transit safety dominated city politics, though not without controversy. The Charlotte City Council's now infamous cake break during a meeting on Iryna's murder had already ignited fury, with many residents accusing leaders of being out of touch and insensitive. While the council defended itself by saying it was a brief pause for a member's birthday, the symbolism was impossible to ignore. At a time when citizens were demanding seriousness, accountability, and reform, the image of elected officials smiling around a cake felt almost grotesque in contrast to the tragedy at hand. Legal analysts watching the case predicted several possible outcomes. If Brown were deemed competent, the prosecution could press for a full trial with the possibility of capital punishment. If not, the state might opt for a plea deal in which Brown would plead guilty by reason of insanity, exchanging the death penalty for permanent confinement in a secure psychiatric facility. Either way, The expectation was that Brown would never walk free again, but for many, that was not enough. The outrage online was palpable, with countless voices calling for the death penalty as the only fitting punishment for such a cruel, unprovoked act. Iryna's case is heartbreaking, but sadly, it isn't the only one. There's another mystery involving two young women who set out on what should have been an exciting adventure, only to vanish under circumstances that can only be described as chilling. Let's revisit the case of Chris Krimmers and Lisanne Froon.
A jungle that lured them in, only to swallow them whole. Two young women vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of haunting clues and chilling silence. Was it the wrath of wild nature, or something far more sinister hiding in the shadows? A decade later, the truth remains buried in silence, unseen, unanswered, and unwilling to be found. April 1st started like any other sunlit morning in Boquete. Chris and Lisanne, both 20-something students with a love for exploration, laced up their hiking boots and set off toward El Pianista, a trail known for its breathtaking views and eerie silence. Some say they had brunch with two Dutch men before the hike. Others recall them bringing along a friendly dog from a local restaurant. Nothing about that morning seemed off, not in the photos Lisanne snapped on her Canon PowerShot camera. The images showed smiles, mountain peaks, and sunlight spilling through the clouds. They looked happy, at peace. Image number 508, the last normal photo, showed Chris carefully crossing a stream just after 1 p.m. And then, nothing. The plan was simple. Lisanne Froon and Chris Krimmers, eager to explore the wild beauty of Panama, had arranged to hike the trail with a local guide. But on the eve of their adventure, something strange happened. They made an unexpected decision. A day earlier than planned, the two young women set off alone into the jungle, without the guide, without anyone to watch over them. Why did they do it? The answer remains a mystery. The next morning, their guide arrived at the trailhead, expecting to meet the two tourists. But there was no sign of them, no footprints, no trace that they had even started the trail. A sense of unease began to settle in. It wasn't until the following day that the search began, but the clues didn't match the story anyone had expected. Against all logic, two hikers were found on the trail. Lisanne and Chris were already deep in the wilderness. But how had they gotten there? The answer lay in an unlikely source, a local taxi driver who had dropped them off near the trailhead. And to complicate things further, there were two other men in the vehicle. Who were they? And what role did they play in the women's bizarre journey? As the details unraveled, the story grew stranger. The women, eager and excited to explore, had ventured into one of the most treacherous areas of the jungle, yet they had no map, no compass, no flashlight. They were walking blind into the heart of the unknown, with no tools to guide or protect them. And so, in the dense, untamed wilderness, they began their journey into the dark unknown, unprepared, unaware, and soon to vanish from the world as the jungle swallowed them whole. They didn't come back. No sign of the girls, no message, no movement. Concern spiraled into panic. Texts to Chris's father went unanswered. By April 6, their desperate families were on Panamanian soil, joined by Dutch detectives, trained dogs, and a hefty reward, $30,000 for any trace of Chris and Lisanne. The jungle was swept, rivers combed, air searched, but there was nothing, not yet. Somewhere past the last smiling photograph, their story took a turn, one that no one saw coming. So what really happened after image number 508? What began as a hike through paradise quickly unraveled into a desperate fight for survival. Unbeknownst to early searchers, Chris and Lisanne had started calling for help just hours after they were last seen. Chris's iPhone tried to reach emergency services, the first of what would become 77 failed attempts. Minutes later, Lisanne's Samsung followed. Both phones kept trying over the next several days, each call bouncing off the unforgiving silence of the jungle. There were no signals. Then came the photos, the strangest and most unsettling pieces of this tangled puzzle. From Lisanne's camera, investigators retrieved 133 images. Among them, 90 shots were taken in the dead of night on April 8th. Almost all were seemingly random. Pitch-black jungle, flashes against leaves, eerie close-ups of rocks, and inexplicable arrangements. A mirror, strips of plastic, white tissues. One photo stands out like a ghost in the dark. The back of Chris's head, slumped slightly forward, taken at 1:49 a.m. Some claimed to see blood near her temple. Others weren't so sure. But the most disturbing clue was what wasn't there, photo number 509, missing from the memory card. Were they deleted, corrupted, or something far worse happened that we can never imagine? Whatever happened in that jungle, it wasn't quick, and it wasn't simple. The question now wasn't just how they died, but what, or who, was with them in those final, harrowing days. It wasn't until June 14th, more than 10 weeks since Chris and Lisanne vanished into the rainforest, that the jungle finally gave something back. A local woman stumbled upon a blue backpack near the banks of the Culebra River, far off the main El Pianista trail. Oddly, the bag was dry and clean, untouched by the unforgiving Panamanian rain. Even stranger, locals swore it hadn't been there the day before. Inside, authorities found both women's phones, $88 in cash, sunglasses, 2 bras, and Lisanne's camera, almost as if someone had carefully packed it, then left it behind on purpose. Close by, Chris's denim shorts turned up, though whether they were folded neatly on a rock or tossed in disarray depends on who you ask. And then came the remains. A foot, still inside a boot, a piece of pelvis, bone fragments strewn along the river's edge. DNA confirmed the worst. It was them. But even in death, the mystery only deepened. Some of Lisanne's remains still had bits of skin. Chris's bones, however, looked almost artificial, bleached white, unusually clean, with phosphorus levels that didn't match the environment. No signs of trauma, no cuts, no answers. Just a heap of questions piling as the investigation moved further. The questions only had silence as a response, a silence that grows louder with every unsettling clue. Who placed the backpack so carefully, and why? Why were the bones so drastically different? And what really happened deep in the jungle that April afternoon when 2 bright lives vanished without a sound? The investigation into the disappearance of Chris Krimmers and Lisanne Froon was anything but straightforward. In the months following their vanishing, Panamanian authorities shifted their theories several times. At first, the case was classified as a possible homicide. Then, the focus turned toward abduction, with rumors swirling and pressure mounting from both the media and the Dutch government. But by March 2015, nearly a year after the girls vanished, the case was quietly closed. Officials concluded that Chris and Lisanne had died as a result of a tragic hiking accident. According to the final report, the treacherous terrain, steep 30 to 40-meter cliffs, and fast, unpredictable river currents were to blame. The ruggedness of the jungle, they said, could easily explain why only scattered remains were found, and why their discovery came weeks apart. Dutch forensic experts, who had worked alongside Panamanian teams, broadly agreed. They emphasized the dangerous conditions of the rainforest and the likelihood that the girls had gotten lost, injured, and ultimately succumbed to the elements. Their families, after months of agonizing uncertainty, accepted this explanation with heavy hearts. The bodies were flown home to the Netherlands, and Chris and Lisanne were finally laid to rest. In their memory, a small stone memorial was placed at the Mirador, the scenic viewpoint near the top of El Pianista, where their final smiling photos were taken. But even with the case closed, the public wasn't ready to move on. In fact, the official explanation only sparked more questions. Critics pointed out troubling inconsistencies, beginning with the mysterious appearance of the girl's backpack. Found along the Culebra River over 10 weeks later, it was strangely dry and clean, despite the heavy Panamanian rains. Locals swore it hadn't been there the day before. And of course, there was photo number 509, the missing image from the camera's sequence. It didn't appear in the memory card's structure, leading some to believe it had been deleted, possibly to hide something. Perhaps most haunting of all were the failed emergency calls made from the girls' phones, spanning days, even after one phone had died. The final attempts came after the correct PIN was no longer used, hinting that only one girl may have remained alive, or that a third party had gained access to the phone. We will dive deeper into the details of their phone's history next. Each detail chipped away at the idea of a simple accident, inviting speculation and sowing doubt. And as the years passed, new theories emerged, each more polarizing than the last. Because in this case, the facts are real, but the truth? That might be slightly evident upon the discovery of their phones. And let us tell you, it only gets more bizarre. In the days following Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon's disappearance, investigators clung to every fragment of information they could recover, and what they found inside two phones, a white iPhone 4 and a black Samsung Galaxy S3, would become one of the most haunting aspects of the case. Both devices, retrieved from a backpack discovered over a week after the girls vanished, painted a picture of desperation, fear, and a chilling silence that slowly consumed them. The phone activity began on April 1st, the very day the girls were last seen. Lisanne's Samsung made the first emergency call to 112, the international emergency number. It lasted for just a second due to no signal. A second attempt followed a minute later, again, failed. Just moments after, at 4:51 p.m., Chris's iPhone also tried dialing 112. That call, too, failed. These frantic attempts to reach help suggested that something had gone terribly wrong just hours into what was supposed to be a casual hike on the El Pianista Trail. On April 2nd, Lisanne's phone tried again, first at 6:58 a.m. and again at 10:53 a.m., both to 112. Still, no success. The calls didn't connect, but the effort alone told a grim story. The girls were alive, stranded, and desperately trying to call out for help. Then, that same morning, Chris's iPhone tried to call 911, Panama's emergency number, at 11:56 a.m., followed by more failed attempts throughout the day. On April 3rd, the calls continued in the morning, another to 911, then to 112, using both phones. But with each failed attempt, hope dwindled. What followed next was even more unsettling. After April 5th, the Samsung showed no further activity. Its battery had likely died. The iPhone, however, told a more cryptic story. On April 6th, it was powered on again, but this time, the correct PIN wasn't entered. From that day onward, someone repeatedly attempted to unlock the phone, never successfully. The calls had stopped. Now, all that remained were silent, failed attempts to access the device, as if Chris herself had been separated from her phone. Or worse, someone else was trying to use it. Between April 7th and 11th, the iPhone was switched on multiple times. Brief flickers of activity in the dark, but with no further calls, no photos, no messages. Just a cold, lifeless glow each time the screen was lit. The final activity came on April 11th at 10:51 a.m., when the phone was turned on for the last time. After that, nothing. The timeline left behind by the phones is one of the most disturbing elements in the mystery. It's as if the devices were their last lifeline, slowly dimming along with their chances of survival. And while no call ever connected, the signal they left behind, a trail of unanswered cries, still echoes through the jungle and through every unanswered question in this haunting case. But the story the phones told wasn't just about failed calls. It was about what didn't happen, about the silence that followed, and the disturbing gaps that raise far more questions than answers. Why, for instance, on April 11th, Chris's iPhone was turned on for exactly 64 minutes, a full hour. No call was placed, no message typed, no photo taken, just an hour of eerie silence with the screen on. Was someone scrolling through it? trying to figure out how to use it? Or did that glowing screen shine in the middle of the jungle, lighting up a final moment of helplessness? And after that, nothing. The phone was never used again. No further attempts to power it on. No final messages. No last goodbye. In a case that left behind hundreds of photos, attempted emergency calls, and desperate signals, the most baffling part might just be this. Why didn't they leave a message? No farewell, no explanation, no note typed into the phone's memo, just silence. These unanswered questions continue to haunt everyone who's followed the case. Because in the end, the phones didn't just tell a story of what happened. They left behind the most bizarre and disturbing turn of events that is enough to keep one up all night. In the years since Chris and Lisanne's disappearance, the case has sparked a wave of intense, often polarizing theories, each one attempting to shed light on the tragic mystery. With each new angle, a deeper layer of intrigue and tension unfolds, as the truth remains locked somewhere in the shadows of the jungle. One of the most chilling theories to emerge is the foul play theory, which suggests that the two women were not just lost, but were victims of something far darker, perhaps a kidnapping or even murder. The case is filled with suspicious details that seem to point to foul play, the bizarre images on their camera, some of which show unsettling, unexplainable scenes, and the fact that their remains were only found months after large-scale search efforts had turned up nothing. The timing of their deaths, so far removed from the last known search, raises the uncomfortable possibility that someone, a third party, may have been involved. And then there's the possibility of tampering. Could their belongings have been staged, the camera manipulated to create a false narrative? The theory lingers in the back of people's minds, unshakable and haunting. But as theories swirl, one stands out for its bizarre and controversial nature, the unrequited love theory. This one is fueled by rumors circulating in dark corners of the internet, suggesting a deep, hidden tension between the two women. According to this theory, Chris harbored unspoken love for Lisanne, a love that was never reciprocated. The story goes that a tense argument between the two led Chris to a moment of explosive anger, pushing Lisanne off a cliff in a fit of unrestrained emotion. Racked with guilt, the theory claims, Chris wandered aimlessly through the jungle until her own death. This theory, however, is riddled with holes. There's no concrete evidence to back up these claims, no signs of a violent confrontation or a hidden romantic relationship. Most dismiss it as a sensational rumor, but it still lingers, unsettling in its intensity. Then there's the organ trafficking theory, a more sinister and outlandish claim. According to this theory, the host family in Boquete somehow got involved with organ traffickers, leading to the two women being abducted on the trail. The idea is that they were held captive for days, maybe even subjected to a horrific fate before being killed. While the suggestion of organ trafficking stirs unease, the lack of any credible evidence to support this theory makes it seem highly unlikely. Investigators have pointed out the absence of proof, leaving the theory to fizzle in the background, a haunting whisper rather than a legitimate possibility. Despite these wild and chilling theories, there's still a sizable group of experts who hold fast to the accident theory, a much simpler but no less tragic explanation. According to this perspective, Chris and Lisanne simply went off the beaten path, becoming disoriented in the dense, unforgiving jungle. It's easy to imagine how quickly the environment could have turned against them. Rugged terrain, sudden injuries, the crushing isolation of the jungle. One of them could have been hurt, forcing the other to venture out for help. The theory suggests that they eventually succumbed to the dangers of exposure, starvation, and the unforgiving landscape, with no way to escape. While it's a hard theory to accept, it's one that, for many, fits the known facts best. An accident, tragic and unavoidable, in a place where survival is a constant battle against nature. Each theory has its own unique set of supporters, and with every new piece of evidence, the questions grow. But the one thing that remains clear in this case is that Chris and Lisanne's final hours are shrouded in mystery, leaving behind only fragments of truth and endless speculation. The mysterious case of Chris and Lisanne has refused to fade into the past. Over the last 5 years, the story has continued to captivate the public's imagination, drawing attention, theories, and intense scrutiny. In 2021, Dutch authors Marja West and Jurgen Snuren stirred the pot once again with the release of their book. The authors, having spent countless hours combing through police files and records, uncovered new perspectives and inconsistencies that had previously gone unnoticed. Their work seemed to breathe new life into the case, offering alternative theories that reignited public fascination. The unresolved questions they uncovered left many wondering, had the official narrative been wrong all along? As the years rolled on, the 10th anniversary of the women's disappearance in April 2024 marked a significant milestone. Despite the passage of time, the case had not faded from memory. Instead, advances in forensic technology and the relentless curiosity of online sleuths led to renewed calls for the re-evaluation of evidence, specifically the bones that had been found and the digital data from the women's phones. With the sharp precision of modern forensic methods, some wondered if hidden clues might finally come to light, possibly shedding new insights into what really happened to Chris and Lisanne. In September 2023, the release of a film took the global spotlight back to the case, once again reigniting curiosity about the two girls' final days. The film's re-examination of the case, highlighting alleged investigative oversights, gave a different perspective to how evidence had been handled. People began questioning, were critical pieces of information overlooked? Were the investigations flawed from the start? As the media spotlight once more focused on the tragic story, it stirred a new array of debate and speculation, causing so many people to wonder if there was more to this haunting mystery than anyone had realized. With each passing year, the case only grows more enigmatic, its disturbing questions continuing to haunt those who dare to dig deeper. New angles, fresh evidence, and renewed curiosity make it clear. This is a story that refuses to be forgotten. As the years have gone by, the families of Lisanne Froon and Chris Kremers have steadfastly stood by the official conclusion of their loved one's tragic accident. Their belief in this explanation has offered them a measure of closure, even as the rest of the world remains captivated by the mystery. For them, the story may have come to an end, but for everyone else, the puzzle lingers. The phone records, camera images, scattered remains, and lingering forensic uncertainties provide enough material to fuel a host of competing theories. While the families try to heal, investigators, journalists, podcast hosts, and online communities are still debating. Some see a tragic, albeit straightforward misadventure in the treacherous landscape of El Pianista's rugged terrain. Others, however, sense the shadow of something far darker, a hidden truth that has yet to be uncovered. Lisanne and Chris's case has evolved into one of Panama's most confusing and talked about modern mysteries. Over the decades since their horrific hike, countless theories have surfaced, each more chilling than the last. Yet despite all the speculation, no definitive answer has emerged. As technology advances and new discoveries surface, there is always the possibility that one breakthrough, whether it's a fresh forensic analysis or a crucial new witness, could shed light on what truly happened during those final days. But until then, the questions remain unanswered, adding to the ever-growing sense of mystery that continues to surround the tragic deaths of Lisanne Froon and Chris Kremers. Was it simply an horrible accident, or was there more lurking in the shadows? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've made it this far, be sure to check out this next video. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you once again for watching.